You're listening to the Backroom Beer League podcast with your hosts, Jacob, Nigel, and Greg. Bringing you your fantasy sports content recorded from the back room. To stay up to date, follow us at BRBL Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and rate the podcast to show us your support. Now, here's Jacob, Nigel, and Greg to talk fantasy sports.
It is 9:05 p.m. on Wednesday, May 6th at the time of recording. And as always, you're listening to Jacob, Nigel, and Greg. And a bit of a different week this week. We decided to move our release to Friday. So when you're listening to this, we released on Friday, originally intended for Wednesday. But unfortunately, Greg's Wi-Fi pretty much blew up. Nigel's Wi-Fi wasn't doing much better on the Tuesday when we tried to record it. So we just moved things up a bit, and in this week's episode, we'll be talking about our weekly fantasy picks, as always, to start the show off, the return of Korean baseball and how that impacts North American sports, the possibility of an NHL draft before the season's end and how that might work, new allegations made against Pete Rose over corking his bat when he was on the Expos, and the effectiveness of live replay in pro sports leagues today. But as always, we're going to start with our weekly pick segment, and I'll go first. My weekly pick this week, fantasy player that is really effective but might not be the most well-known league-wide. As sad as it is cheering for the New York Knicks, the widespread mediocrity on the roster actually has a tendency to hide the only true cases of success on the team. And I think this player is a fine example of this. Mitchell Robinson is a fine example of this happening. Mitchell Robinson's only 21 years old, and he plays beyond his years. He's in the 99th percentile in points per shot attempt, and he has 3.6 shots blocked with 1.4 steals per 36 minutes in his entire career. Even though he's 7 feet tall, he plays hard without looking clumsy. He makes it look natural. And all around, he's a great center to have on a fantasy roster. I think this pick is a lot like Greg's pick, actually, in an earlier take of the weekly pick segment, where he chose Josh Jacobs as his pick. Mitchell Robinson's a player, even though they're in different sports, that he's likely a third-round pick in fantasy drafts right now. But next season, a lot of people are projecting him to jump to a first-round pick. And I think his production is definitely going to take off. He was pretty much the best player by far on the Knicks this year. Like I said, not much to cheer for when you're cheering for the Knicks as a team. But if you're looking at individual players, Mitchell Robinson is definitely one you want to keep your eye on. And I think he's only going to continue to impress both Knicks fans and fantasy owners this next season.
Yeah, I like Mitchell Robinson.
As a Knicks fan, you got nothing else to hope for.
He's such a versatile player. I mean, when you see Mitchell Robinson doing his thing on the court, some nights you're getting shelled by the Los Angeles Lakers. You want to only watch highlights of Mitchell Robinson the next day. I mean, it makes a 30-point loss to LeBron and the Lakers that much easier to handle when you're only seeing the best parts of the night, which came from Mitchell Robinson and occasionally RJ Barrett. But I think a lot of Knicks fans don't even really realize the true potential of this player because they just don't watch the games anymore. They're that disassociated with their own team that they don't even watch the games. And it's hard for anyone else to watch Mitchell Robinson succeed in New York because nobody wants to watch Knicks basketball if you're not a Knicks fan. So it's kind of a double whammy.
I'd agree, honestly, but I think even if they are watching the games, that the spotlight's kind of taken by guys like RJ Barrett and Julius Randle,
and whoever they're playing.
Yeah, and for the majority of the last season, Marcus Morris, who played extremely well for you guys, but his age is a concern. But that's besides the point. It's just Mitchell Robinson is by far one of the most underrated players in the NBA, and
Yeah.
I think his efficiency is something that's really, really eye opening. He's really probably the only consistent thing about the entirety of the Knicks organization.
Well, I was looking at who to choose for this weekly pick segment this week, and I kind of wanted to choose someone from basketball, and I don't really usually indulge myself in fantasy basketball content or fantasy basketball leagues in general, but I really do like watching basketball, and I do from time to time take part in a fantasy basketball league. And honestly, this isn't really even my homer side coming out because you can't even really be a homer for the Knicks. It's really hard to be a homer for the Knicks because it's almost a sign of shame. I should be ashamed to be a Knicks fan right now. But I looked at the top 100 players tentatively for the 2020 and 2021 season. It looks as though Mitchell Robinson is going to take a huge jump from all these analysts in fantasy basketball and basketball in general. He's going to take a huge jump in his production. And I think, Knicks fan or not, it definitely needs to be said that Mitchell Robinson doesn't look for the spotlight that often, but he definitely deserves it because the things he's doing behind the scenes in New York, they're definitely something to watch.
Yeah, when you play for the New York Knicks, there's this aura that surrounds not only the organization but the players. New York is such a star-studded city in general. I feel like it's easy for the Knicks players to get lost in that, especially when you're young. But I don't think Mitchell Robinson did that in the slightest. And frankly, being one of the most underappreciated players in the entire league, it's been easier for him to develop. He's not getting scrutinized near as much as guys like Bam Adebayo were before this year, or as much as
I've seen it happen with RJ this year.
Yeah, and that is so unfair. But I think Mitchell Robinson's just straight up lucky that he didn't have to deal with that, and I think it's proven to help him.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like when you come into New York and try and help this organization, even if you're not the biggest name brand like a Julius Randle of the league, you come in, no matter what Julius Randle does on the team. I'm not the biggest fan of him, but there are people that cheer for the Knicks that hate this guy. And he's not even a bad player. He's one of the best players on our team. I mean, he's not great, but he's not, terrible. I just don't think that even really applies to Mitchell Robinson because he flies so far under the radar. And I think that's especially true for fantasy. If you can grab Mitchell Robinson, I definitely take the chance either in draft or in a trade. Just push him into a trade. Some guy might not even notice he's in there until he clicks accept. Seriously, like he flies that far under the radar league wide, and you might get a steal. So that's my pick for the week. Mitchell Robinson, the Knicks.
I think it actually kind of wraps into mine really, really well. So I think I'll just go next.
Yep.
We were literally just talking about how Mitchell Robinson had no attention coming into the league, right? And how that benefited him. And my pick of the week is a guard from the Indiana Pacers, Malcolm Brogdon, who was drafted mid-second round after finishing 4 whole years at the University of Virginia, which, I'm sure you guys know, but especially in the sport of basketball, it seems as if once you pass your sophomore season in college hoops, your draft stock plummets. It doesn't even matter how talented you are. And it's always something that's confused me. And I think this is a really good example of how that front offices can kind of get kicked in the ass from their indiscretions, because Brogdon, who is an absolute steal by the Bucks, has averaged almost a double-double through his career, and he has averaged almost a steal a game. He's an insanely strong defender who gets blocks. He's tight on the wing. And in a fantasy perspective, this guy shoots a pretty high clip. He has a pretty consistent, decent field goal percentage. He averages, like I said, I believe it was like 16 points and 8 assists a game last year. It's almost a double-double. That's really good value of someone that you could pick up late in your draft or in the middle rounds of your draft to kind of be your backup guard, point guard, shooting guard. I think he provides really good value off your bench, and I think it's worth taking a look into Brogdon if he's still there in your draft. And when you get into the later rounds, and I think in general, and in his playing style, I think that Brogdon is a very underappreciated player. As I said, he won Rookie of the Year, and then all of a sudden it seemed as if he had disappeared off the face of the earth. But in reality, he was improving every single year. And he was starting to fall behind the shadow of guys like De'Aaron Fox, and though not that they were his draft class, but that kind of position. And I feel like that was unfair. And I actually think that was his draft class. Now that I'm kind of no, it wasn't. Never mind. Anyway, Malcolm Brogdon is just one of those players that's always very consistent. You're not really going to be disappointed by his performances, and sometimes he blows up for 25, 30-point games, and everyone goes, oh, geez, who's this Malcolm Brogdon guy? But he's been around for a while, and he's a really consistent and valued fantasy piece if you can pick him up late.
Yeah, I think Malcolm Brogdon, the fact that he's been in the league for 5 years now, 6 years.
Yep.
Yeah, 5 years. Going from the Bucks to the Pacers, he has a lot to prove. Was it him being effective just because of the team that surrounded him on the Bucks, or and he also said that he's been more valued by the Pacers than he was on the Bucks. So I think going to a new team in Indiana, I think he's definitely got a lot to prove, and he wants to kind of separate himself from the Bucks team that he was on and become more of a player that he wants to be proud of himself, right?
Yeah, look, he's really proved himself to be one of the best players coming out of this decent draft class that he was in, right? 2016 was a good year.
It was.
Simmons, Ingram, Jaylen Brown, I think, was picked third. Jamal Murray was there with Domantas Sabonis, and just all of these super solid players. I think Karis LeVert was picked, and that's the year of Siakam. That was a steal in itself. But I think the fact that the Bucks drafted Brogdon in the second round is not only impressive, but the fact that he made a career for himself is just as impressive, and it shows his character.
Well,
and yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
I was going to say, personally, I think him being moved to Indiana is, you could say, hurtful to his personal value, because Indiana is not exactly a fan state. He's not going to get a lot of recognition. But fantasy-wise, I think that's great, because you can get a guy who's going to be solid, but his name's not going to be thrown out there a lot later because he plays in Indiana and nobody watches the Pacers.
Yeah,
I think it's definitely valuable to say that, Nige, because it's kind of true for both Brogdon and for Mitchell Robinson to say that the pressure might be off of them a little bit, considering they're both playing. And I mean, it's a little bit different because Mitchell Robinson's still playing in a big city for
Mitchell Robinson's playing behind players where Brogdon's playing behind the fact that he's in Indiana.
Exactly. The pressure's off them, so they might perform a little bit better than they might if.
I think it's developing. I think they develop better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
you were talking, Greg, about front offices giving up on players too early there. It's actually a good segue into my player, because instead of giving up on this guy, his front office did the exact opposite and stuck with him, and it's now starting to pan out. I went to the sport. I strayed away from football for this week, even though, everybody knows football is my sport. But I'm a hockey guy, too. I enjoy hockey, especially even though the Devils suck, I still, stock it. So my player is the number 1 overall pick from the 2011 NHL Entry Draft, and that's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. So anybody who knows stuff about Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, when he was drafted, a lot of people have considered him a bust, even though I don't think that's a fair thing at all, because really the only person in the 2011 draft class right now who's outperformed Nugent-Hopkins is Gabriel Landeskog, who's taken at 2. Like the 2011 draft class we're seeing now, guys like Jordan Binnington and Mika Zibanejad are literally just, becoming names that you'd hear. And Zibanejad was, I think, like a second-round pick out of Ottawa. He might even higher.
I'm pretty sure he was second round.
I think he was second round in Ottawa, because Ottawa gave up on him too early. But Nugent-Hopkins, especially last year, he's started to prove himself and shut the people up who've been calling him a bust. But especially last year, where hopefully the season continues. But right now, in 65 games, Hopkins had 61 points, 22 goals. So for 22 goals, 39 assists on an Edmonton team that I really think in the second half of the year started to click really well together. They started, grooving together between, now that he's, and let's be honest, Nugent-Hopkins for a lot of his career didn't have a lot of help. He was playing on a poorly managed Edmonton team with guys like Nile Yakupov and huge other busts following in his place where he had little support. So now that he has the support of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl to take a lot of the heat off it, I think Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is a guy that you can find later in draft because he has a stigma around his name as a bust, even though he's not. That'll get you really, really good value, either coming off your bench or actually I think he improves next year and solidifies himself as a solid starter.
I think it's definitely valid to say that Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has been pretty much shorted for his whole NHL career. Being on the Edmonton team, like you said, with Nail Yakupov, Magnus PRV Svensson, some of these
rough
players
names.
who actually did become busts and were proven to become busts. He went through 8 coaches, 3 GMs, something like that. He's
nuts.
Definitely had it rough in Edmonton, and like you said, they're just starting to click this year. I think they're starting to click this year in a big way because Draisaitl is actually starting to hold his own weight this
really
year.
Well.
Really well.
I'd call it more than holding his own weight.
Possible likely Hart Trophy winner.
Yeah. But in previous seasons, a lot of people were saying, well, is it only McDavid that's kind of you're seeing the uptick in Draisaitl's numbers, and you're saying, well, is this only because of McDavid? But then McDavid got injured this year, and you start to say, holy shit, well, actually Draisaitl can carry the team himself. And I mean, Nugent-Hopkins is finally playing on a competent team now, it seems, and a lot of people like Landeskog in his draft class got to play with McKinnon and a few other. You could
see like Gabriel Landeskog, Colorado kind of did the same thing to him, where like for most of early 2000s, Colorado, 2011's Colorado was a shithole. Now that they have McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen and Cole, and they have a possible, Calder winner and Cale Makar, but like both these guys are screwed and they both lead their classes. And even then, I was looking at the numbers. Gabriel Landeskog doesn't beat Ryan Nugent-Hopkins by much in point totals.
No.
Yeah, if we're looking at that
totals,
draft class, though,
minus totals, he
the first round of that draft class was rough. Devils took Adam Larson with like the 6th pick or the 4th. Like even now, everybody's like hopping on Mika Zibanejad train and saying he should have been picked super early. But you got to remember, Mika in Ottawa I think he only had one 20-goal season.
He's mediocre.
This is his second 20-plus goal season in his entire career so far. Yeah. So yeah, he was lights out for the second half of this year, but like recency bias clouds a lot of judgment, and it makes people, I think, a lot harder on Nugent-Hopkins than they should be.
This wraps in really well to the conversation that we had last week about when to call players busts. Because by all three of our definitions, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was a bust. But
Oh,
now
for
he's
sure.
proving his worth. So I think people are so quick to just immediately judge someone and call them a bust. I mean, literally everyone in the world of sports is guilty of it.
Oh, yeah.
Literally everyone. And I've been wrong on it so many times, but I think he was just given this just negative aura around him. Just it was preconceived after his first 2 or 3 years in the league that this guy was just a shit player and he wasn't going to develop and it was over for him. But then in comes McDavid, in comes Draisaitl, in comes this core with a competent coach in front office with a solid tendy, and then they're set. And Nugent-Hopkins is now with a team is performing. And I think that fits perfectly into what we said last week.
Yeah, I completely agree, Greg. And you're saying this guy would have been classified as a bust, no doubt. And a lot of the other names that Nigel would have said and claimed himself would have been bust too. Mika Zibanejad is just showing his prowess now in New York, in Bennington.
And even the start of last year, Benny looked rough.
That's the thing. We talked last week about when to call players a bust, and we talk about the longer development curve in certain sports. And although the NHL, its players might just kind of dive right into the sport right away, and they don't sit in the minors usually as often or as long as players do in baseball for 2, 3, 4 years.
Drafted at 18 compared to the average everywhere else is 22. I think that's 4 years.
Yeah,
Jack
they're
Hughes
just starting
is younger
to hit their
than
prime
me,
now,
and he's starting NHL games.
Well, 9 years ago,
so whack
he is literally in the physical prime of his life. He is in his peak physical condition right now as a 27-year-old man.
It's the NHL is such a long development curve for the most part. It's such an interesting. Nico Hischier is another guy, and this is a bit of a homer who people thought, wow, a bad pick. But after Taylor Hall left this year, and they gave Nico a leadership role, he started to really, honestly, he started to flourish. And it's not he wasn't flashy, and there's room for improvement, but he's definitely showing a lot of strides in the right direction. It's so different because you look at NFL players that are taken anywhere from 22 is the youngest they can be taken. I don't think they can be taken younger than 22.
Foolish.
No, I guess it's they technically can forgo their senior year and get taken at 21, because that's what Trevor Lawrence will probably do. But but you can also get taken at the age of 24, like Joe Burrow. Same with the MLB. They're drafted, but they often sit in the minors for a plethora of time.
I mean, it's different with the MLB because you could have players like Jason Dominguez in the Yankees system right now. He's 16 years old, and he's literally 5 years away, and he's a top prospect.
You look at guys like
it's crazy.
Juan Soto.
5 years away from being MLB ready. That's not even 5 years away from being a good
Juan
player.
Soto's 21,
he's a top prospect
and he's
at 16.
taking the league by storm as a young gun. But then you have other guys like J.A. Happ, who really didn't have a solid career success until his 30s.
Yeah.
Because he's what?
I think it's, to be fair, in that comparison, I think pitching and field position
Pitching is a long development.
So different. They're so different.
I think before we get too off track here about development curves, we should go right into the weekly rundown. And our first topic in the weekly rundown is the NHL Draft in early June. It's said to be scheduled for June 15th, 16th or something like that. And a lot of people are wondering how this is going to impact the playoffs that are set to take place after, once COVID-19 restrictions become a bit more loosened and they can continue the season that was put on pause. this kind of opens the question for the drafted prospects. Are they going to be able to play for teams they're drafted to in this playoff tournament set after the NHL draft? There's a lot of questions surrounding this whole thing, and I think it's just kind of weird that, you know, forever and a day it would have been the NHL draft always comes after the playoffs are over, the season's done. Players go on their vacations for the summer, but obviously everything's been changed and flipped upside down.
Well,
so
one thing I want to think I mentioned, and I've talked to you guys about this, is like, what's this do to conditional picks? Like, for example, the Devils have two. One linked to Vancouver making the playoffs, and the other linked to Sammy Vatanen playing a certain amount of games in Carolina. With the season,
there's going to have to be some sort of
do conditional picks automatically get granted to their upper or their lower?
There's going to have to be some sort of base value given to conditional picks, I think, because they can't really...
Like, you can't be like, oh, you can have a...
If you roll either way, they're not going to...
Someone's going to be unhappy either way it goes. Happy. And the other thing, Jake, we saw this tweet Monday night when we initially were going to record that Bob McKenzie from TSN had talked about that they're going to go back to the lottery format of 2012 where you can only jump up 4 picks. So if you're outside the bottom 5, you can't get to the number 1.
I'd just like to chime in and say that I think this is the fucking stupidest thing ever. And I understand why the NFL had their draft is because they're in the off season. This is when it was scheduled to go the entire time. And they made the appropriate adjustments, and I'm like, God damn it, it went pretty well. All things considered.
Oh yeah, for sure. The format they had went really well for everything I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be a complete train wreck.
But I don't understand why Gary Bettman just doesn't take his finger out of his ass and click into the idea that they should follow what the NBA is doing.
I just don't understand.
Move your draft until at least August. What's the difference?
I also don't understand changing the lottery format. Like, what's the point of that? What's it change?
All it does is infuriate like execs. Like, that's all it does.
It seems so stupid because like now teams can't jump up 4 picks, but like nobody like can jump up more than 4 picks, but like.
A lot of this is done for ratings. A lot of it is done for ratings.
The only reason they're considering doing this is because of revenue.
Because they watch.
But it's weird that the NBA would move it to August and the NHL doesn't. Maybe I guess that's the difference between Adam Silver and Gary Bettman.
Yeah, Adam Sandler's a cool. Adam Sandler, Christ.
Bobby Boucher, commissioner of the NBA.
Excuse me, Adam Silver. That was funny. Adam Silver is a competent guy where Gary Bettman is a pompous piece of shit.
Bettman watched Goodell's drunk ass 2 weeks ago and said, I can do that.
Goodell's kind of a legend, man. I hate him, but like...
he was hammered. But like, I don't think it's a good idea to hold the NHL draft so soon. I don't. They're probably going to do it
you know
anyway.
What
No, I don't think it is either.
Do you know what I possibly think this could mean, fellas? I think this is a sign that they're scrapping the year.
I think they should. I hate to say that, but...
I mean...
I'm not sure, though.
But
there's been talks that it's been moved to Edmonton as a hub city.
Vancouver was another one to put in a bid for it.
Listen, boys, listen. I understand.
It's definitely a preemptive measure.
I want the season to continue just as much as the next person, but...
It's unreasonable. I mean, we all agree with that.
I'm only saying that to myself because... Like, I hope it's just not for revenue because that pisses me off more than anything.
I said from the start, treat it like a lockout.
100%.
Except people get paid.
Yeah.
Treat it like a lockout. Say, too bad we couldn't get back for the season, and then just have a kick-ass season next year. It really does not need to happen. I get that people are bored, but things are starting to reopen in some places.
Like, Jumbo Joe shaved his beard for Christ's sake.
Yeah. Like, you're really gonna do this, and every title that's going to be won in each of these sports leagues, it's going to be contested. I mean, people are going to be like, did they really win it on fair grounds with the adjusted season?
I wouldn't even want to win the cup this. I mean, I would obviously, but the fact of the matter is, like, you know how big the asterisk beside your name is going to be on the Stanley Cup. Like, God damn, like.
And it's the same thing. Like if Ovi won the cup this year with the Capitals in some sort of adjusted playoff scenario, and all the shit going on, we magically came back from the shitty end of the season run we were putting on before things closed down, and we end up winning Ovi's second cup. Forever after that, Ovi's second cup would always be sort of like a half Stanley Cup.
Yeah, they'd be like,
the real
second
deal.
one shouldn't even count. Second one shouldn't even count. And man,
Because
I'm not a huge Ovi fan, but that wouldn't be fair to the guy.
Yeah, I know. And it's always been debated between Crosby and Ovechkin, which is the better player, which is the better legacy. And it's always been this debate of, well, Crosby has 3 cups, 4 cups, 5 cups, 6 cups. What does Ovechkin have? 1? Now he has 1. And if he wins this one this year in an adjusted playoff bracket, it's like 1.5.
It just wouldn't count in the media's eyes, in my opinion, in the long run.
Speaking of the topic of sports, not being around and the NHL possibly coming back, we don't need it anymore. We got live sports, don't we, Jake? It has returned.
It's kind of returned. I think the first night it got rained out. The Korean Baseball League is the first real sports league to return on a full basis, and it's being aired in North America, and a lot of people are actually watching it and enjoying it. I think Nigel's already picked his team.
Samsung
I haven't even
Lions.
looked at the teams really.
I just think it's so funny that all their teams have brand deals.
I will not be tuning in.
Fuck yourself, Greg.
The first night it came on, people were so hyped about it. They stayed up until 1 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Atlantic time in our case, or 2 a.m. Atlantic time in our case, and they're up in the middle of the night watching baseball, and one of the major games or something rained out, and they couldn't even watch it. So
listen, I need live sports.
It just shows you how shitty 2020 is really being right now. You can't even watch Korean baseball at 2 a.m. in the morning.
That's not a statement I think I'd ever hear anybody say in my life.
A lot of people are liking it, though. I mean, there's
taking my Samsung
in
Lions, going for it.
I don't know if I like it. I'm not going to find out if I like it.
Yeah.
Swear to God, man, if I was watching a sport and I saw an anime commercial, like
It's on ESPN.
Oh, man.
Some guy ran into the wall, too, when he was trying to track down.
This is what I love. Like, I'm not amateur sport leagues, but these like below major sport leagues, because kind of like dumb shit happens.
Yeah, there's only 10 teams in this league.
Yep. I'm telling you.
I don't know. I think it's definitely an opportunity for people to actually, be interested in sports leagues outside of
I'd watch
America.
Fucking darts if it was televised right now. I am desperate. And the KBO is my answer.
You hating on darts?
I'll watch televised Korean baseball, but he'll watch a guy throw a dart at a board with an announcer in the back.
Dude, you see how hype it gets? It's ridiculous.
Can you imagine being the announcer for darts? And he throws it at the board. Triple 60.
Like those
triple 20.
Yeah. Those British guys announcing just lose their shit.
It's like the golf announcers.
When they hit one.
What a stroke! And I'm like, what? Like, how is this hype to you?
My favorite, this is such an off-topic comment, but my favorite random sport moment of all time was when that guy hit a strike in that bowling game and he went, "Who are you? I am."
Yeah, I remember that.
Freaking out. Man, the little sports have like the best moments. Like, it's basically an episode of Fail Army.
Because these athletes don't know how to react.
Who are you? I am. What?
What did that mean?
What are you saying? Anyway, this Korean baseball, like I don't know if I'm gonna tune in. I mean, I might give it a shot once or twice, but I do swear to God, if I see like one K-pop commercial, it will be off.
You do realize it's just the game being aired on a Western network. They don't actually pick up the whole Korean feed. You do understand
Before we move
this.
on, did you guys in the early 2010s, like 2015-ish, I guess, mid, there was a clip from a Taiwanese baseball game, and the announcer was just a legend. If you can find this clip, like one of the comments, he says a guy hits a home run, he's like, "That ball is gone, like your stinky ex-girlfriend. The ball is gone." It's gold. It was on radio.
Why is stinky the first descriptor he uses?
Like, it's on Ray William Johnson way back when he was a thing, did a thing on it, and I loved it. I can't remember. I don't know if it's still up, but it's a gold clip if you can find it.
Man, this is how they get their views. You know, you drop a comment like that, people have to watch after that. The last topic on the rundown is Pete Rose is being accused of using corked bats during his tenure in Montreal. A former groundskeeper has come forward that used to work for the Montreal Expos and has claimed Pete Rose corked his bats during his time in 1984 with the team, which further discredits the exiled baseball star. And if you don't really know what corked bats are, they're pretty much a bat filled with cork, so they're easier to swing. And the perceived advantage of using one of these would be that they're easier to swing, thus making it easier to hit the ball. This being an accusation made against the player that still holds the title for the most hits ever in baseball. That's a pretty serious accusation. I don't care what you say about his gambling accusations before. If this comes out to be true, he's going to be even more torched in the media.
Like,
it's a pretty elaborate story. You got to read it. My
only thing is, you had almost 40 years to bring this to light. You had 36 years, and now, when he's trying to make his reinstatement with the Astros argument, now you choose to do it. Like, it just seems like such a
Yeah, you're kind of a piece of shit.
It's definitely a piece of shit move. I do not dispute that.
In the Hall of Fame. I mean, like, I know everybody's gonna say Barry Bonds, but Barry Bonds was a scapegoat, and I will die on that hill.
Barry Bonds didn't need the roids.
Like, Barry Bonds was the guy who they could scapegoat.
But did Pete Rose need a corked bat? Because apparently, according to this accusation, the groundskeeper who came forward, it wasn't actually him doing the corking. It was someone that he worked with. And at the time, he asked what this was all about to the guy who was doing it for Pete Rose. And the guy who was doing it said, Pete Rose has been doing this for 20 years before this. So
it just seems...
It's kind of interesting.
Something about this seems so fishy to me. Like
it seems fishy, but it's like...
why wait this long? Like, what are you benefiting from?
Classic ex-boyfriend just got drafted to the NFL move.
Like, there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Well, maybe the reason he kept it behind closed doors for all these years is because he felt that if he brought it forward, he would then be pointed to as the one who did it, being associated with the groundskeeping crew that did this for Pete Rose.
Like, I don't understand. I know what you're saying,
doesn't
Jake,
exist anymore. This was 36 years ago. You're not going to be able to, like, what are you going to do? You already have a ban.
The same argument that you're making could be made against what you're saying. Why would he make this argument, 36 years later? Well, what would he have to gain 36 years later from doing it? If it's fake, then what would he have to gain from it if he brought this forward? It's not like he's making any money off this claim.
I guess, but I just don't get why you wait that long.
It's definitely weird that he waits 36 years.
You're not making it either way, so why wait till he's trying to get himself reinstated?
The time to say it would have been when he was exiled from the league and
It seems like
banned.
Pete Rose might have told this groundskeeper to go fuck himself, and he's holding a grudge. And now that he might have a chance of reinstatement, this groundskeeper's like,
This really, this just kind of reminds me of the groundskeepers really looking for some sort of validation. And yeah, I'm not saying it because it didn't happen, because it very well could have. And I mean, all the players could have been doing this. But the fact that he waited...
Sammy Sosa did.
The fact that he waited more than 30 years to bring the news out is not only gutless, but it seems like it's a personal intent to,
I would agree with that,
to keep Rose out of the Hall of Fame for good.
There's a few missing details here that connect it to it being released 36 years later.
Yeah, and the one thing that I will say is that maybe the groundskeeper felt like the news was never worth sharing because they assumed that Pete Rose would never be put back into the Hall of Fame anyway. Yeah. And then with everything that's going on lately with the Astros and him possibly being inducted and reinstated, all that jazz, maybe they put the final dagger into Pete Rose's back.
That's actually kind of a fair argument to make. It's definitely interesting to you guys definitely have to read the story.
Seems like an interesting read.
The claim that he makes is that because Pete Rose was only in Montreal for 1 year, one season.
That's so fishy to me.
Yeah, the claim is that he corked his bat in the visitors' dugout, so the visitors' groundskeeper did it for him, and the home groundskeeper, I don't know. It's really weird. Moving on to our next segment, different segment, first time doing it. What we're going to be doing is talking off the cuff and giving three of our most favorite nicknames in all of sports. So, for example, the King, Henrik Lundqvist.
Oh, you are not gonna say the King for Lundqvist and not LeBron.
Yeah, but
God damn!
As an example, Jesus Christ, don't attack me.
Oh, you almost had me fucked up, Jake.
Three favorite nicknames from all sports. Doesn't matter what sport, what player. What are your three favorite nicknames?
With one of mine. And this involves channeling my inner Stephen A. Smith. Anybody knows?
Oh, yeah, I know what one this is.
Yeah.
I know exactly which one this is.
Bad man. That's Aaron Rodgers, baby. Bad man. Love it.
Oh my God.
That was so over the top.
My eardrum just
Stephen
burst.
A. does it, and I love it. Other one, I gotta go prime time. Deion Sanders. Love prime time. My last one, definitely mine. All three are football players. He's a Lion, but Dick Night Train Lane. Night Train Lane's such a fucking sweet name.
Yeah, it is sick. I'll go next, man. I like number one, rest in peace. Number two, it's sick. The Black Mamba.
Yeah,
that is sick.
That's juicy.
I like the whole like the snake connotation is just dope. I kind of like Kung Fu Panda for my boy Pablo Sandoval, but I don't think I'm gonna include that in my picks. That was just an honorable mention. So I hope
definitely an honorable mention.
I hope that wasn't your pick, Jake, because like. So
no.
Yeah, well, I got an honorable mention. Number two is Air Jordan, not just because it's so iconic, but also because the fact that he built an entire brand off of it and has made millions of dollars, like hundreds of millions of dollars off of the nickname that he created off a shoe brand, which is unreal. And then my number three would have to be Matty Ice
for Matt Ryan,
because dude, I think it just rolls off the tongue. Like Matty Ice, and it just I don't know.
Yeah. Matty Ice more than I call him Matt Ryan.
Yeah, that's exactly when I was thinking about all of these. I was like, what's something that just rolls off the tongue? And I'm like, Matty Ice. It just came to me
Kind of a
instantly.
persona.
So yeah. Oh, 100%.
Starting with my nicknames, I think the first one that comes to mind, being a Bears fan, got to go with Walter Payton, Sweetness. There's just something about that nickname, kind of warms your heart, kind of makes you shed a little tears thinking of that beautiful man. But there's nobody like Sweetness. We've never had a team that good in the Windy City since
85.
Sweetness moved on.
It's been a while.
The second one is the Fridge.
That's
William
a G.
Perry.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. It
The
was close,
Fridge.
man.
That is badass. I don't care what you say. And another bear. I mean, there's kind of a,
Man,
there's
I
kind
only
of a
went with
connection
one
between these
homer.
names. Well, I think we have to give some sort of prize to the Bears for having all these good nicknames.
It's two.
And my final nickname, the Sultan of SWAT, Babe Ruth. You could say the Great Bambino, but the Sultan of SWAT, I think, is my favorite Babe Ruth nickname. It's hard to think of nicknames off the top of my head. I could only really go with Homer Takes there because I'm trying to think.
Honorable mention, and I'd say Bam Bam Cam Chancellor, because that nickname just describes what that man did his whole career. Just knocked people the fuck out.
Our debate topic for this week is, does live replay help or hurt sports? And I think we're going to start with you, Nige.
The over replay in modern sports 100% does. Almost makes it unwatchable. But if it's done right, it wouldn't. Like my example is the NHL. The NHL has gone way too replay heavy. When they're calling goals off because guy was an offside by like a fucking 1/10 of a second, get out. Like, if it's not visible at like the speed of the human eye or like slightly slowed down, but like some of the offsides they're calling, it's like, man, it's ridiculous.
I think the thing that pisses me off most about the NHL's replay system is there was one time in overtime, the Capitals, I forget who they were playing. Oshie scored in overtime, and they automatically review to see if it was an offside on the play, even when the coach of the other team didn't even motion for a replay to be had because he thought it was offside.
They do that in the NFL as well.
Yeah,
every score, turnover.
But the fact that the coach of the other team, it might have been the Sharks maybe, or the Jets or something like that, someone from the Western Conference. Anyway, Oshie scored this beautiful goal. I thought we were down and out. We pushed it to overtime. Oshie gets this beautiful goal, and automatic review ended up being offside, and we lost the game in a shootout. Pissed me off royally, and I just don't think it's necessary. I mean, if it's that close that a coach doesn't order a replay to be had, then is it really necessary to have in the first place? Me being a viewer watching it on TV, I didn't even notice.
Well, in my opinion, I don't think the hockey one is as much of an issue as the
fucking
NFL.
Dickhead.
And how Alberto Riveron is the biggest incompetent piece of human garbage that has ever held an executive position.
I think the NFL is really like skewed because of
even
personal
before him,
opinion.
there was like the Fail Mary with Green Bay and Seattle, where it was a clear interception that they called a touchdown. That was the straw that broke the replacement ref's back. But like this year, it was awful.
Here's my thing. If you're going to replay a scoring play, just for an example, or how about this? A player catches a ball on the sideline and steps out of bounds, and it's being debated if it was a catch or incomplete based on being out of bounds. If you say that it's an incomplete catch, the team challenges the play, and then it proceeds to be wrong. Have the goddamn balls to admit you're wrong. don't just rely on your shitty ego to provide you with some sort of validation and that you force a team to lose a game. That's just so spineless, and it happens so much in the NFL this year.
Since this is it is a debate, it does help sports to have live replay because there are some costly calls that can be overturned, some stupid umpiring calls specifically in the MLB that can be overturned sometimes depending on whether it is a replayable offense that wouldn't be able to be overturned otherwise. I'm trying to think of an example. I can't really think of one off the top of the head, but live replay actually does do some good, even though it does get a really bad rap for having completely shitty connotations because of the situations it's been used in and failed.
It's just the issue with a lot of it is the problem isn't, I don't know if this is the same for hockey, but I know in the NFL when things get replayed, it's not the refs who review it. It's taken to New York. And that's where it gets fucked.
Yes.
Like, that's I do true. Admit that it's needed in some instances.
I think it's like that in every
it's an
sport
overreach
league,
a lot of times. Like, it's needed in some instances. Like, but there are some times where, like, the review is just stupid. It slows down the game.
Sometimes it proves to be absolutely useless, though, because sometimes in basketball, they'll call a foul, they'll go to replay over the foul, and then they won't change the call, even though it's blatantly clear with video review that it was the wrong call to make. It's the same with the
reviewable pass interference. Like, that was a mess because, like, it would be clear as day that it was PI, but they didn't want to make the refs look bad, so they'd call it off, even though it just makes everyone look worse because it's blatantly obvious.
I think one of the biggest things that kind of swamps and bogs down video replay, live replay, it's the referees' fear of being proved wrong. Not even the referees, I guess, but kind of the officiating body in general. It's like that in the NFL.
It's just...
Yeah.
It's kind of a shit show. Like, again, like my thing is if it's done right, and there are times when it's extremely helpful.
You see, the problem with live replay is that even if it is done right, it helps a side and it hurts a side no matter what.
They always say no matter what your call is, somebody's going to be pissed, even if it's 100% right, because it didn't go their way.
Yeah. And we were talking about this like a couple of podcasts ago, robo-umps in the MLB. There's such thing as being too right all the time. There's such thing as making every call right to a point of error. And I think that's what live replay does sometimes. They try and get every single call perfect, and in turn, they slow down the game. They piss off the fans for making them wait through all these calls to go to replay. And sometimes they don't even get them right when they do have replay.
Yeah, I think I'm not a hater of replay, and I mean in general I think that it's a positive thing for almost all sports, but it needs to be used correctly, and the authority of the referees cannot be taken away from them because of it.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think like live replay is something that needs to be used in really difficult situations, but the fact that we're going to live replay for offsides and stuff in hockey and those sort of very minor infractions, I don't think that's right. I think that slows down the game unnecessarily, and it overturns goals and really important plays unnecessarily that could easily be overlooked.
Yeah.
Things like in when they go to a replay after a goal in the NHL and the person actually had a stick above the crossbar, thus being a high sticking call, I think that's valid use of live replay. But like I said, offside,
I get it if it's a blatant
unnecessary.
offside that was missed. Like, if Buddy's a quarter mile offside, but like those ones where it's like barely noticeable.
But then you don't even have to go to live replay, really. You look up at the scoreboard and you say, oh, shit.
It's like,
I really just missed that.
It's useful in the NFL a lot, I say, with fumbles, whether distinguishing whether it was off the ground or punched out. But even then, sometimes they fuck it up.
There's a lack of accountability against in the refs. They're not held accountable for the missed calls and shit that they're
apparently they were
for.
instructed, NFL refs, at least this past year, to always call any ball that pops out a turnover, because then it's sent to review and they can make sure they get the call right. But even then, they fucked it up. Because in that New England game, Bill had to challenge for a clear fumble, so we lost a shot at not having to use a challenge.
Yeah, that's true.
Not that I have any fucking sympathy. But we all know it can help, but there are states of replay that hurt sports, especially for the viewer itself. And it's definitely
it's like
the inability to admit you're wrong is a huge one.
Yeah.
Live replay sometimes is just literally unnecessarily pausing the game.
Takes the momentum out of it too.
It takes the momentum out of it. It proves nothing sometimes. Sometimes they won't even overturn the call because it adds nothing to the actual
the
60-minute NFL game, which is an hour and 15 because 15-minute halftime. So all that with your commercials and due to live replay, those games are now like 3.5 to 4 hours. Like Sunday Night Football starts at 9:30 in where we're from in the Atlantic time zone. We're often like, Jake, when we often watch those games, it's like 1 a.m.
Yeah, you're right.
Same with Thursday nights.
I'm just saying, like, MLB tried to instate different rules this year for pace of play. So each pitcher, if you're a reliever, has to face a minimum of 3 batters because they don't want, specialists coming in, lefty, throws against one batter, strikes him out. Then you get a new pitcher, and then you get a new pitcher for this guy, and a new pitcher for this guy. They want to speed up the game. Well, an easy answer to speeding up the game of baseball, folks, get rid of all these goddamn reviews.
Yeah.
It's really an easy solution.
Even like baseball reviews, a lot of time, I find if there's a review that normally doesn't even like matter in sports, it's baseball, because most of the time the call stands.
I mean, there's some stupid umpires in baseball, but like sliding into second and going to review over a stolen base. Are you kidding me? Yeah, the review might overturn the call made on the field, but does a stolen base really matter if it's in the 6th inning? Like, most of the time it doesn't. If it's in the 9th inning, it's a different story. The problem is you could always
argue that every single advancement of a base matters, and it's a shit show.
You could argue that every single offside in hockey matters too. I agree with your point,
but like that's the argument that someone could make.
Yeah. Once you have it too, it's hard to take away. Like, it's hard to say, well, guess what? We can't review anything now.
They are taking away that PI review, though. Owners like unanimously refused to vote on bringing it back because it was such a shit show. But once a power is brought in, normally it won't leave.
Yeah, I don't really have any except they need to be used correctly if they're used at all.
My dad is very highly on the opinion that you just get rid of them.
I can see it.
I mean, I can see that too. Like,
at a time when it wasn't a thing.
There was a time when every single sport didn't have video replay, and guess what? We got along just fine. The average viewer can't watch and pick out every single detail when they're watching live. It's the TV. It's the overproduction of a hockey game showing all these different angles and replays.
Like, fans are always going to kind of be able to see a bit more than the refs, because the refs, only have certain viewpoints. The game also, moves faster for them because they have to move with it. And the human eye is like we have the ability to go back and rewatch a play. They don't. Like people will oftentimes get like way overboard and like forget that these are human beings who are capable of making an error.
I think that just about wraps her up, eh? We actually won't be having a debate topic next week. I think we're going to change it up and maybe add a different segment in place of a debate topic. I think we've been having a lot of these debate topics turning into more of a discussion rather than a debate. So we're going to try something new next week. Not sure what it's going to be, but stay tuned for that. Follow our social media at BRBL Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe to the Backroom Beer League YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, everyone.